next morning, one of his roommates entered the room because they were supposed to go to the gym together. And he like jumped out of bed in the craziest way possible I've ever seen, being like, "Get out!" My first time having sex was magical, but almost. I was 19, and I think sex was a pretty big deal to me. I had 3 conditions to him, my only sexual partner, when we first started dating, and one of them was no sex. And part of that reason was, bachpan se I'd been conditioned that sex was an after-marriage thing, or, it was something that was not okay to do before marriage. But I think I hadn't had time to process what it meant to me. I knew the basic biology of it, but I don't think I fully understood all the social aspects of it until much later. Around the same time, my brother was a teenager. I was 19, he was 15, and he was growing up. And it was really important to me that in our home, we created a safe space to talk about it. My parents didn't really grow up talking to me about sex. I remember when I was 12, my mom came to me one day and she's like, "Do you know?" I said yes, and she handed me a book. This was a book that had been given to her by my doctor in the US actually, and it said, the sex talk for 8 to 12-year-olds. So she waited till the exact end to give me the book. So I knew the biology behind it, I knew the other things, but I started talking about it at home in a hypothetical situation just to make it more comfortable for us to talk about those things. This was all way before I'd ever had sex. There was no real talk about it at home, it was just a very after-marriage thing, or it was very clinical because all my grandparents were doctors. There was conversation about the fact that it existed. It wasn't like, "Oh, ye shabd kya hai?" But it was just a thing that existed or could exist in my life. We talked about, all of it, and I said no sex because, for me that was important, and he was totally cool with it. We all grew up with this idea, seeing pop culture or porn or films, that sex equals penetration, which is absolutely not true. It can mean anything you want it to mean, and it's all parts of the intimate act. When I finally felt ready to have sex, at that point I'd come to terms with the fact that it was an act of love for me, something like sex or any of these things that are so overwhelming, because it's not just physical, it's emotional, it's mental, it's physiological, there's hormones involved. I think it's just really important to understand why you're doing what you're doing, the potential consequences, and therefore how to stay safe, and all of the things in association with that. I was really grateful because he was a very supportive partner. He did not pressure me in any way. I think as we started dating more and more, we became gradually physical, but to the point of hand-holding or like first base, second base, whatever that meant. It was never expected that we would reach fourth base or anything. But the point at which I felt ready, I knew I was very ready because I was very sure I was in love with the person, and I think that was important to me. My first experience, I'm really grateful, was in a way that it felt good because it felt consensual. It felt, we were taking things slow. The first time I had sex was about 5 months into our relationship. And at every stage, whether that was caressing or moving through the bases, there was so much respect. And part of that, I was scared because of course it was my first time. It was my first time being in a proper relationship, let alone, anything related to intimacy or sex. Whereas he had been in other relationships and he had had many other sexual partners before me, which on one hand did make me a little insecure, if I'm being very honest. But on the other hand, given that he was more experienced, he was able to guide through. And I do remember there being this flip switch, actually. The first few months were kind of him guiding me through the physical experience, but then once I got more comfortable, it also was the other way around, which was really cool, actually. The setting of the first time, like I mentioned, I actually distinctly remember it was this day. We were so emotional about things. The day I said I love you was the day we attempted to have sex, which I will tell you about why it was almost magical. I told him I loved him. I didn't think I would be the first person to say that, but I did. And then he just started crying. And he said that he loved me as well, and he'd been wanting to say it for so long. That same night, I felt ready. And he describes this as a face, like, of course, I explicitly stated it, but he said that I had this face that he just, he knew that emotionally I was ready. So we decided, okay, do we have protection? Do we have a condom? But the first time, like that exact day, it didn't happen. Because I had no idea, and I guess that was not his prior experience, but we did not have something called a lubricant, which was extremely necessary, especially given it was my first time. So it just literally did not work. Insertion was not possible because there was no lubricant. So The next day, we went and bought lubricant, and the day after that, we're able to. And by that point, we'd explored other stages of physical intimacy, so it didn't feel foreign and like, oh my god, this is just crazy. It felt a next step, but it didn't necessarily feel like a home run or cricket terminology, like a chakka, it wasn't like that. It felt normal, and it felt natural and a part of, the holistic experience. It was really beautiful because it truly felt magical. It felt like it was an expression of the fact that you loved somebody, We both prioritized each other's mutual pleasure, and that was something that, again, since he had more experience prior, he was constantly pushing that too, which was amazing. But it shouldn't be amazing, it should be normal. And so it was never an experience where I felt like it was just for his pleasure. It always felt like it was mutually pleasurable. As to where it happened, it was in his dorm room. He had not roommates, but he had suite mates. So he had his own room, but in the same, suite, there were 2 other people. I actually remember the next morning, one of his roommates entered the room because they were supposed to go to the gym together. And he jumped out of bed in the craziest way possible I've ever seen, being like, get out! It was very cute. Since we met in college, that was basically, it was either most likely usually his dorm room or mine. That was essentially the location. So if it was ever elsewhere, it felt more exciting. We were obviously very clear that contraception was important, but lubrication is very, very important. I felt super safe, which was really important to me. I felt super loved, which was also important to me. I think it's totally cool to have more casual situations, but you have to know that that's what you want. I know that that's what I didn't want in the moment. It felt just like, oh, okay, that's just a part of what happened. The reason for that is because it had been such a gradual process, and it took a very long time. I think the other thing that also helped, to be honest, is because we'd explored other aspects of intimacy besides penetration right before, we'd already been seeing each other's private parts essentially, and there had been such a emphasis on mutual pleasure that it just felt like, okay, this is one other way to enjoy it, as opposed to this is the big thing, And I think that's the cool part, because later on in life, I think if starting out we had just seen sex as penetration, then it would have been like, oh my god, we can't have sex anymore. Whereas it can be so many other things, right? And I think it felt like a beautiful experience, especially because it was an act of love and discovery for me personally. I think that's what's kept it really lovely kind of all throughout, where even if there are difficulties, and that can happen at any stage of life to anybody, medically or otherwise, you still can enjoy intimacy and pleasure. In society, we really hype up this idea of your first time having sex. I don't believe in this idea of virginity, right? Virginity is a social construct, and, for anybody who thinks it's a certain way or it's not, it doesn't have to be that big a deal, or it can be depending on what you think of it. I think that it can be beautiful, but you don't have to give it that much power. It's just a part of everything, life. And for some people, sex is not even how they view relationships. Across the spectrum, some folks are asexual, or some folks, there's absolutely nothing wrong with waiting till marriage or not doing it at all. You just have to know what you want, and you have to be very communicative about it. I hope this was helpful. You can also check out my first kiss story right before this. And if you'd like for us to make more firsts videos, I have many, many more stories, bahut kahaniyan hai. Please bata do comments mein so we can bring more to you. And do not forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Dobara.